All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling a pretty big question.
Yeah.
How do we move past all the, political chaos we see everywhere? How do we create a world that's just, well, more grown up?
Right.
I'm really excited to get into this source, Pasted Text, which offers this unique perspective from the Baha'i faith on leadership and how we govern ourselves.
Interesting.
It actually makes this bold claim that humanity is basically like stuck in its adolescence. Prone to conflict, making short-sighted decisions, all that.
I can see that.
It's a pretty powerful image, don't you think?
It is. And this source goes deeper than just the analogy.
Oh,
it connects this whole adolescence idea to what we see playing out in politics today.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Partisan hatred, corruption, systems that seem to burden people instead of helping them.
Yeah, I see you.
It's a pretty honest look at where we are as a species.
So if we're kind of trapped in this political teenage phase, what's the way out? I mean, can we even picture a world where leadership isn't about grabbing power and winning no matter what?
That's the big question. And this source actually suggests a pretty big shift.
What kind of shift?
It quotes Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith.
Okay.
He urged leaders to basically be reconciled among yourselves, that ye may need armaments no more, save in a measure to safeguard your territories and dominions.
Wow. So he's saying, imagine a world where cooperation and unity are at the center.
Right. Not just political gamesmanship.
It's definitely a huge contrast to the political scene we see today. It seems like it's all about scoring points against the other side.
Yeah.
Genuine cooperation feels kind of rare.
Yeah.
But how do we even start to close that gap? Is it actually possible to move past this whole us versus them approach?
That's the core problem, right? This source argues that it's precisely this win-lose mentality that's holding us back. It creates divisions, breaks down trust, and ultimately distracts us from the real problems we should be facing together.
So what's the alternative?
It's suggesting we redefine leadership itself, shifting the focus from power to service.
This idea of leadership as service. This is where things get really interesting. The source lays out specific qualities that make up this kind of leadership.
Like what?
Justice, equity, and this commitment to consultation and collaboration.
And it doesn't just leave those as, vague ideas. The source quotes Abdul Baha, who defined justice as ensuring that all should have rights. Each individual should receive his due, and no soul should be oppressed.
Powerful stuff that connects these high ideals to the everyday experiences of people,
Yeah.
That's a pretty high standard, wouldn't you say? How often do we actually see leaders who put everyone's well-being first? I mean, ahead of their own interests or their supporters?
It's a tough ideal, no doubt. But remember, this source isn't just criticizing how things are, it's presenting a whole new way of thinking.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's asking us to imagine a world where leadership isn't seen as a prize to be fought over, but as a sacred duty.
All right, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. We ditch the power struggles. Everyone focuses on serving others. But what about the structures we have now? Like kingship or presidency? Do those just disappear in this ideal world?
That's where it gets even more interesting. This source doesn't say we have to get rid of those roles entirely.
Oh, really?
It suggests that they can be transformed.
So instead of all-powerful rulers, kings and presidents become super dedicated public servants.
Exactly.
But how would that even work?
The source stresses that in a more mature world, these positions wouldn't be about privilege, they'd be about responsibility. There's a quote from Baha'u'llah that says, "The sovereign is the most exalted of all men, if he be adorned with the ornaments of justice, of mercy, and of devotion to the well-being of his subjects."
That's pretty radical. It's like flipping the whole script on how we view these roles.
It is.
I'm starting to see how this source isn't just some abstract ideal. It's pushing us to rethink power and leadership from the ground up.
And to show it's not just a theory, it points to the Baha'i administrative system as a working example.
Ah, right. It's like they're saying, hey, this isn't just pie in the sky. We're actually doing this.
Yeah.
What makes this system so different from the political systems we're used to?
The Baha'i system is fascinating because it gets rid of partisan politics altogether.
No way.
No nominations or campaigns, just individuals elected based on their character and service.
Wow.
Think about it. A world where political strategy takes a backseat to genuine service.
Hold on. No TAC ads. No political debates. How do they even decide who to vote for?
It's all about consultation. The Baha'i faith places huge importance on making decisions collectively through open and respectful dialogue.
So instead of one person calling the shots, it's a group effort to figure out what's best for everyone.
Right.
Honestly, that sounds way less stressful than the political systems we see today. But can this kind of system work on a bigger scale? I mean, the Baha'i community is pretty small compared to, like, entire nations.
That's a fair point. And it's one we'll dig into more as we continue this deep dive. What's important is that the source isn't saying we should just copy-paste this model onto everything.
Okay.
It's more about offering a new way of thinking about leadership and governance, one that prioritizes unity, consultation, and service.
Makes sense. So it's about looking at these principles and asking ourselves, okay, what parts of this, even if we don't adopt the whole thing, could work in our current systems?
Exactly.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to know more about how this Baha'i system actually works in practice. What are the nuts and bolts? How does it deal with real-world problems?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore more in part 2 of our deep dive.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Me neither. So we're back, diving deeper into this whole idea of a more mature, more unified world.
All right, we left off with this big question: can this Baha'i system, which works so well in a smaller community, actually be applied on a much larger scale?
It's a huge leap, yeah. From a community to, like, a whole nation or even globally. How do these principles even translate?
Exactly.
Well, this source doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Okay.
But it does highlight one really important concept. The Baha'i administrative system works on this principle of unity in diversity. Decisions are made through consultation and collaboration, and every voice is valued.
Unity in diversity sounds beautiful, but also super complex.
Yeah.
How do you actually make that work when you're dealing with millions or even billions of people?
That's where the idea of evolving structures comes in.
What does that mean?
Well, the source suggests that just like the Baha'i system has its own elections and decision-making bodies within its community, larger-scale governance could adapt similar principles. Imagine a world parliament, for example.
Okay.
It wouldn't be made up of politicians fighting for their own national interests, but individuals who are dedicated to, the well-being of the whole planet.
That's a pretty big vision. But wouldn't that require us to, completely change how we think about governance?
Absolutely.
Right now, it feels like it's all about countries just looking out for themselves.
The source acknowledges that. It argues that the way humanity runs things politically right now is basically a reflection of how immature we are collectively. We're kind of stuck in this adolescent phase, as it puts it.
So we need to, grow up politically.
Yeah.
Sounds like we need a therapist for the whole planet.
Haha, in a way, yeah. The source suggests that real progress requires a shift in consciousness. We have to move beyond this us versus them thinking that dominates so much of politics today.
That's a huge challenge, though.
Yeah.
How do you convince people, especially those in power, to let go of the systems that benefit them?
It's not really about convincing anyone. It's more about creating a process of understanding and growth.
Okay.
And this source really emphasizes education as a crucial tool for that transformation. It's about teaching people from a young age to see themselves as global citizens, interconnected and responsible for the planet's well-being.
Starting young, that makes sense. Planting the seeds for a more unified future. Right. But what about those of us who aren't in school anymore? What can we do to contribute to this shift?
The source emphasizes lifelong learning. It's about challenging our own biases, looking for different perspectives, and having meaningful conversations, even with people we disagree with.
So, step outside of our echo chambers and engage with the world in a more open way. I get that. But how does that individual growth lead to actual change in the political systems?
The source suggests that as more individuals embrace these principles, it creates this ripple effect.
The ripple effect.
It influences our communities, our institutions, and eventually even our leaders.
I see.
Imagine a world where voters choose candidates who actually embody qualities like justice, unity, and service, instead of those who just throw around divisive rhetoric.
It's a powerful image. But wouldn't that require a fundamental change in how we see leadership in the first place? Instead of seeing it as about power, we'd have to see it as responsibility and service. How many politicians today actually fit that description?
That's exactly the transformation the source is calling for. There's a quote from Bahá'í that says, "The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." It's a vision that goes beyond national borders and political ideologies.
I'm starting to understand how this source isn't just a critique of how things are. It's actually a blueprint for a completely different way of thinking about governance.
Right.
but it all feels very idealistic. What are the actual practical steps we can take to move toward this vision?
Well, the source offers a bunch of suggestions, ranging from individual actions to changes in the system itself. It encourages people to do things like engage in service to others,
Okay.
promote unity in their communities, and advocate for policies that are in line with these principles.
So it's not just about waiting for the world to change. It's about being a part of that change, starting with ourselves and our immediate surroundings.
Exactly.
But what about the bigger picture, the global challenges, like climate change, poverty, conflict? How does this source address those?
That's where global governance comes in. The source doesn't shy away from this idea at all.
Global governance. Sounds huge. What would that even look like? Are we talking about a world government, like something out of science fiction?
It's not about imposing one system on the entire world.
Okay.
It's more about developing structures that allow for collaboration and cooperation on a global scale.
So like what kinds of structures?
Imagine nations working together to solve problems, sharing resources and knowledge,
Okay.
not competing for power and dominance.
It's a nice thought, but is that really possible?
It is a monumental challenge, no doubt. But the source points to historical examples, like how the United Nations was formed, as proof that even when there's conflict and division, humanity can still find ways to cooperate and build structures for peace.
So it's not about being naive, but recognizing that progress, even if it's slow and tough, is possible.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure that this global governance doesn't just become another form of centralized power open to corruption or abuse?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
The source emphasizes that any system, whether it's national or global, is only as good as the people in it. It goes back to that core idea of individual transformation, cultivating those qualities of justice, unity, and service within ourselves. It's about making sure these values are woven into every level of society, from the individual all the way to the global.
So it's a two-pronged approach. We need to work on both individual and systemic transformation, changing ourselves and the systems that govern us.
Okay.
But how do we make sure this transformation doesn't get taken advantage of by those who might use it for their own gain? How do we protect against corruption and abuse of power, even in a system designed for unity and service?
That's really important, and the source acknowledges it as a potential challenge.
Yeah.
It emphasizes the need for transparency, accountability, and the active participation of citizens in how things are governed.
So empowering people to hold their leaders accountable, to make sure power is truly used to benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Right.
But how do we actually do that? What are some concrete ways to safeguard against corruption and abuse?
That's a question worth digging into further, and we'll look at some specific strategies and examples in the last part of our deep dive.
So we're back, and we've been talking about this Baha'i vision of a more mature, unified world.
Yeah.
We've covered some really big ideas, like leadership as service, global governance, this whole need for a shift in consciousness. It's inspiring stuff, but it also feels, well, a bit overwhelming.
It is a big picture, for sure, but the source we're looking at doesn't just leave us with these, abstract ideals.
Right.
It actually gives us practical steps we can take right now to contribute to this transformation.
Okay, I'm ready to get practical. Where do we even start? What can we as individuals actually do to make a difference?
The source emphasizes that real change starts with us.
Okay.
It's about looking inward first, making sure our own actions are in line with those principles of unity, justice, and service.
So before we change the world, we have to start with ourselves. I get that. But what does that even look like, practically speaking?
One suggestion is to become more aware of the language we use.
Our language.
Yeah, we're adding to the division and negativity, or are we choosing words that build bridges and understanding?
That's a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment and let our words become weapons, especially with how politically charged everything is these days.
Exactly. And the source also encourages us to look for opportunities to serve others, both in our local communities and in the wider world.
This whole idea of service keeps coming up. It seems like it's at the core of this vision for a better world. But what does service even mean in our everyday lives? Does it have to be some big, grand gesture, or can it be something smaller, more personal?
That's what's so great about it. Service can be so many things.
Like what?
It could be volunteering, mentoring someone, or even just listening to someone who needs support.
Yeah.
The important thing is to approach these things with a genuine desire to help and contribute to others' well-being.
I like that. It makes this idea of service feel a lot more doable, something we can all do no matter our situation.
Absolutely. And the source emphasizes that even though small acts of kindness and service, they create a ripple effect. It can inspire others and create positive change way beyond ourselves.
So it's not just about making a difference in the world. It's about nurturing a more, a more compassionate and service-oriented way of being within ourselves. But, like we talked about before, individual actions alone can't solve every problem out there.
Yeah.
At some point, we need to address those bigger systemic issues, right?
You're absolutely right. And the source acknowledges that. Individual transformation is crucial, but it's not enough on its own.
Right.
It also calls for collective action, working together to create change on a broader scale.
Okay, collective action. That could feel a bit daunting, to be honest.
I know.
Where do we even begin with that?
One suggestion is to connect with people and organizations that have similar goals, people who are like-minded. There's power in numbers. And by joining forces, we can have a bigger impact and create more meaningful change.
So find your people, the ones who share your values and your vision for a better world, and work together to make it happen.
Exactly. And the source also encourages us to use our voices and our resources to advocate for policies that are aligned with these principles of unity, justice, and service.
Okay. How do we do that?
Contact your elected officials. Participate in peaceful protests. Support organizations that are tackling the issues you care about.
So be an engaged citizen, not just a passive observer. Use our democratic rights to push for a system that actually reflects what we believe in. But, let's be real, sometimes it feels like those in power aren't listening. How do we make sure they hear us?
It is a challenge. But the source reminds us that persistent, peaceful action, it really does make a difference. History is full of examples of movements that started small but brought about huge changes through dedication and, just not giving up.
So stay engaged, stay informed, and never lose hope, even when the road ahead seems long and tough.
Exactly. And remember, this journey toward a more unified world, it's not just about reaching some far-off goal.
No.
It's also about the journey itself, the connections we make, the lessons we learn, the impact we have on our communities along the way.
It's about creating a more just and compassionate world, step by step, starting with ourselves and then letting that ripple outward. It's a powerful message of hope and action, something we can all embrace.
I agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to emphasize this vision of a more mature, more unified world.
Yeah.
It's not just some utopian fantasy. It's a real possibility.
It is.
If we're willing to embrace those principles of unity, justice, and service. And if we're willing to work together to create the future we want.
It's a call to action, an invitation to be the change we want to see, both in our own communities and beyond.
Yeah.
And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and sharing them with others. Remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us.
No.
It's something we create together.